All right, this is Numbers 10 in the Prager Rational Bible. Let's begin. The trumpet blasts. All right, verse 1. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Have 2 silver trumpets made, make them of hammered work. Now this trumpet is not to be confused with the ram's horn or a shofar that the Jews sound on Rosh Hashanah to call a congregation to repent. And a well-known example of the trumpet is mentioned here, also made of silver. It's a well-known example of the trumpet. It was discovered in Tutankhamun or tomb dating from the mid 14th century BCE. And this is one of the many examples attesting to the antiquity of the Torah. And they shall serve you to summon the community and to set the divisions in motion. So a system of trumpet blasts provided a way to communicate with the nation, and it was as follows. Both trumpets, long blasts, the community of fighters assembles. When both are blown in long blasts, the whole community shall assemble before you at the entrance of the tent of meeting. And if only one is blown, the chieftains, the heads of Israel's congregants shall assemble before you. So one trumpet, all the heads of the tribes assemble. Short blast, east camp moves forward. But when you sound short blasts, the divisions encamped on the east shall move forward. And then short blast a second time, south camps move forward. And when you hear the short sound blast a second time, then those encamped on the south shall move forward. Thus the short blast shall be blown for setting them in motion. Long blasts convoke the military bodies of the congregation. So while to convoke the congregation, you shall blow long blasts, not short ones. The trumpets shall be blown by Aaron's sons, the priests, and they shall be for you an institution for all the time throughout the ages. And when at war, short blasts remind God to protect his people. So when you are at war in your land against an aggressor who attacks you, you shall sound short blasts on the trumpets, that you may be remembered before the Lord your God and be delivered from your enemies. So it would appear that God promised to deliver the Israelites even if they are attacked, but not necessarily if they initiate a war. Now of course in Joshua 7, when they went to fight against Ai, they were defeated. Because there was sin in the camp that had to be dealt with. Because the guy Achan took some stuff from the site of Jericho, and you weren't supposed to do that. So, anyway. So the Lord was with them as long as they were obedient. Basically. Alright, verse 10. And on your joyous occasions your fixed festivals and noondays, you shall sound the trumpets over your burnt offerings and your sacrifice offerings of well-being. They shall be a reminder of you before your God. I am the Lord your God. The first day of each month, or new moon, or Rosh Chodesh, was a festive time. All right. The Israelites' travels recommence. Now begins the second part of Numbers, the journey of the Israelites in the wilderness to the promised land of Canaan. The last time the Torah described the journey was in Exodus. But until this point, Leviticus and Numbers dealt primarily with laws, not narratives. Yeah, because they were at Mount Sinai getting the law from God. Yeah, which they get to Mount Sinai, I think, in Exodus 19 or so. Yeah, somewhere around there. Yeah, and they're pretty much there for the rest of Exodus. And, of course, all of Leviticus, because it's just more laws. And then the first 10 chapters of Numbers, still there until now. Verse 11. In the second year, on the 20th day of the second month, the cloud lifted from the tabernacle of the pact, and the Israelites set out on their journeys from the wilderness of Sinai, and the cloud came to rest in the wilderness of Paran. When the march was to begin, the Lord commanded through Moses the first standard to set out troop by troop was the division of Judah. In command of the troops was Nahshon, son of Amminadab. So tribe by tribe the Israelites set out. And the preeminence of the tribe of Judah was already established in Numbers 2:9. And Nahshon was Aaron's brother-in-law. Exodus 6:23. Okay, I didn't know that. And those who lived before us matter. In command of the tribal group of Issachar, Nathaniel, son of Zuar, and in command of the tribal group of Zebulun, Eliab, son of Helon. And then the tabernacle would be taken apart, and the Gershonites and the Merarites, who carried the tabernacle, would set out. The next standard to set out troop by troop was the division of Reuben. In command of its troop was Eliezer, son of Shedeur. Shedeur, however you say that. In command of the tribal group of Simeon, Shelumiel, son of Shurishadai. And in command of the tribal group of Gad, Eliasaph, son of Duel, or Duiel. And then the Kohathites, who carried the sacred objects, would set out, and by the time they arrived, the tabernacle would be set up again. And the next standard to set out troop by troop was the division of Ephraim. In command of its troop was Elishama, the son of Ammihud, and in command of the tribal group of Manasseh, Gamaliel, son of Pedazur, and in command of the tribal group of Benjamin, Abidan, son of Gideoni. Then, as the rear guard of all the divisions, the standard division of Dan would set out troop by troop, and in command of its troop was Ahiezer, son of Ammishaddai, and in command of the tribal group of Asher, Pagiel, son of Akron, and in command of the tribal group of Naphtali, Ahira, son of Enon. Other than Nahshon, son of Amminadab, few, if any, of the tribal commanders' names were known to anyone who lived after them. But the Torah insists here and elsewhere on listing names of those who played a role in their time, but whom history has forgotten. Why? One obvious reason is that they were known to the Israelites of that time. And another argument for the text's antiquity, for it being old, of course. And another reason is that it's the Torah's way of telling us that not only the famous are significant. Those who lived before us, though we know almost none of their names, were important. Of course, not all people are equally important to their time or to history, but everyone, famous or not, is a precious being entirely known to God, if not to us. And this is why Israel has made heroic efforts to discover the name of every one of the 6 million Jews murdered by the Nazis in Shoah. which means Holocaust. Every nation should do the same. The Chinese should name the tens of millions of their people killed by Mao Zedong, the horrible communist leader. Yeah, like 50 to like 70 million people or so died under his leadership. The Russians should do the same for the tens of millions of victims under Joseph Stalin, another horrible communist leader. Probably even Ukrainians that were killed under Stalin as well. And then, of course, remember the names of all the Cambodians who suffered under Pol Pot, and so on and so forth, and probably also the Cubans who suffered under Castro, and so on. And not to do so is to accept their irrelevance, that they ultimately don't matter, even though they did, because those people were created in the image of God, and they should not have been tortured or murdered. It's evil. And I believe those leaders are definitely feeling the heat for that stuff. Yeah, I doubt that they repented of any of that. Probably not. So, and such was the, alright, but such was the order of the Israelites, going back to the text, as they marched troop by troop. Alright, and then Moses invites his Midianite in-laws to enter into the promised land. Got a little bit of notes here. This is the last section of chapter 10. Alright, verse 29. And then Moses said to Hobab, however you say that, son of Reuel the Midianite, Moses' father-in-law, we are setting out for the place of which the Lord has said, I will give it to you. Come with us, and we will be generous to you, for the Lord has promised to be generous to Israel. Now, there's a confusion here regarding some names. Moses' father-in-law, Jethro, is also referred to in the Torah as Reuel. The problem concerns Hobab, who is identified here as Moses' brother-in-law. Yet Hobab is another name for Jethro, Judges 4:11. So is Hobab Jethro or Jethro's son? And various scholars have argued for one or the other. And scholar Rashi, for example, writes that Moses' father-in-law in this verse applies to Hobab and not Reuel. And others argue that the word Hotan, I guess that's Hebrew, can mean either father-in-law or brother-in-law. And in this regard, there's a scholar named Timothy Ashley who says this. T.C. Mitchell has attempted to show that the root H-T-N, Hotan, however you say that, regardless of the vowels, because of course ancient Hebrew does not have vowels, but it meant something like a relative by marriage. Hence, father-in-law, brother-in-law, or son-in-law would be possible as the context requires. And we'll see what source that's from. What source is that from? Okay, it comes from a commentary by this Timothy Ashley guy. The Books of Numbers, the New International Commentary on the Old Testament. And it was published in 1993. In Grand Rapids, Michigan, William B. Erdman's Publishing Company, 1993. Okay. And as I generally prefer to follow the plain text, it would seem that Hobab, spoken of here, is the son of Reuel, or Jethro, and therefore Moses' brother-in-law. Probably so. The seeming problem that the Torah states is that Jethro had 7 daughters. Exodus 2, 16 through 21. And it mentions no sons is not insurmountable. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So again, the seeming problem is that the Torah states that Jethro had 7 daughters and mentions no sons is not insurmountable. So probably he may have had sons, but just probably doesn't mention it. And in Exodus, it was relevant to mention the daughters only, given Moses' interaction with them at the well, and their bringing Moses to their father Jethro's home. Therefore, Jethro could have had a son, but for this reason, the Hobab referred to in this verse may have been Jethro's son and Moses' brother-in-law. Yeah. So probably if this was Moses' brother-in-law, and probably could have been married to one of the other daughters of Jethro, I guess. All right. And what's more significant is that Jethro was a Midianite, given the role that the Midianites would play later on in the book of Numbers. In Numbers 25, in seducing the Israelites to idol worship, and that the Midianite nation became a mortal enemy of Israel. And one would think the Torah would not go out of its way to portray a Midianite as a great man and an indispensable advisor to Moses, but it does. Yeah. Well, probably maybe Numbers 25 may happen, after. Maybe Jethro was high priest of Midian. So, I don't know. And of course, the false prophet Balaam also plays a role in what happens in Numbers 25 as well. And he ends up losing his life for it later on. Alright. But stay tuned, Lord willing. And Moses' father-in-law was a Midianite priest, and according to the traditional biblical commentators, he was also a worshiper of God. And given that fact, and given the unique role Jethro played in Moses' life, it's quite understandable why Moses urged his in-laws to join the Israelites in entering into the Promised Land. Yeah. And since Jethro did ultimately believe in Yahweh, then I don't think he, and it's not even in Numbers 25, but I don't think he played even a role even in the rebellion that would happen in Numbers 25 with the idol worship. I don't think so. Or he probably may not have been alive anymore, because that's into the wilderness wanderings. So it's probably towards the end of the 40-year period, or maybe somewhere in the middle. I don't know. Alright, but Hobab replies to Moses and says, I will not go, but I will return to my native land. And he said, please do not leave us, insomuch as you know where we should camp in the wilderness and can be our guide. So Moses' plea to Hobab might appear to some as maybe demonstrating a lack of faith in God. Why ask a human to guide the Israelites on their journey when God has expressly promised to do so? Yeah, and God does do so by a cloud by day and fire by night. But there's an important lesson here, one of the most important in life. No matter how much faith we have in God, humans must do whatever they can to achieve what needs to be achieved. In the words attributed to the early Catholic theologian Augustine of Hippo, St. Augustine, who lived from 354 to 430, he said this: pray as though everything depends on God. Act as though everything depends on you. Pray ultimately that His will would be done on earth as it is in heaven. Yep, and of course cast your cares upon Him, Yeah, because prayer is basically petitioning God, asking God, but ultimately you should ask that His will be done and that He would provide the daily bread and keep you away from keep you from all evil, and to deliver you from evil and to not lead you into temptation. Basically, yeah, the Lord's Prayer in Matthew 6. So, and that hopefully we would act accordingly. And although Moses often implored God to do something, and this is the only instance in the Torah in which Moses begged a person to do something, a testimony to how much he had come to rely on Jethro's family. His affection for Jethro and his reliance on his father-in-law for advice are apparent throughout Exodus 18. Yeah, because in Exodus 18, Jethro comes to visit, and, Moses has to deal with the different problems of the people, and Jethro's like, hey, you're going to wear yourself out doing this. You shouldn't do this by yourself. You need to appoint godly men to help you with this, basically. And I think in chapter 11, yeah, he's finally going to take that advice. 32. So if you will come with us, we will extend to you the same bounty that the Lord grants us. And they marched from the mountain of the Lord a distance of 3 days. Of course, mountain of the Lord is the Torah's term for Mount Sinai, where God gave Moses the 10 Commandments. The Ark of the Covenant traveled in front of them on that 3 days' journey to seek out a resting place for them. So it's difficult to march through the desert for 3 days without taking a break. And in response to this exhausting experience, sadly, the Israelites will complain bitterly in the next chapter. The first stage of the march is a 3-day journey to Tiberah, 11:3, in the wilderness of Paran. And Jacob Milgrom recites the Midrash, which states that Israel was so delighted to leave Sinai, for staying there might mean receiving additional laws. Yeah, but they were delighted to leave Sinai, that they marched uninterruptedly for 3 days. In this way, they were like the schoolboy who runs out of class, is dismissed, lest the teacher call him back and impose some new assignment. So I guess they were happy to leave pretty quickly, otherwise probably they would get more laws. I don't know, but that's interesting. And I cite this midrash to illustrate an important point about Jews' relationship to the Torah's laws and the ability of religious Jews to acknowledge any ambivalence about their faith. That the ancient rabbis would write that the Jews were delighted to leave Sinai lest they receive even more laws from God, and Moses is simply remarkable. Nor is that midrash unique. And there's another midrash which states that the reason the Jews accepted the law at Sinai was that God threatened to drop a mountain on their heads if they refused it. And Jews have always regarded the Torah's laws as both a blessing and a burden. They did so because Judaism allows them free thought, and because both are true. The laws are the moral and religious genius of Judaism and a burden. And one of the earliest Jewish descriptions of Judaism is its being a yoke of the kingdom of heaven. Now, here's the Hebrew. I may not say this right, but I'll see. Al Malkut Shemayim, however you say that. However, it is difficult to name almost any blessing that does not constitute a burden. Children are almost a perfect example. Yeah, but ultimately the law was given to be a tutor to show us our need for Christ because we can't keep it. That's ultimately why the law is given, and we cannot be justified by the law, which is what fails in Judaism. Yeah, because if you're a good enough person in that system, maybe you can still go to heaven. But none of us are good, that's why we need a Savior. So hopefully Prager will come to realize that at some point. Alright, verse 34. And the Lord's cloud kept them above by day as they moved on from camp. And when the ark was to set out, Moses would say, Advance, O Lord, may your enemies be scattered, and your foes flee before you. And when it halted, he would say, Return, O Lord, you who are Israel's myriads of thousands. So in the ancient Torah scroll, verses 35 and 36 are flanked by the Hebrew letter Nun. Well, you got the English letters, N, U, N, where you have the word none, but anyway. Alright. Which are written upside down and therefore look like and function as parentheses. Yeah, that letter. And this is the only section of the Torah written in this manner, and we don't know exactly why, but clearly these are important verses. And in fact, they are almost the most widely known verses in the Torah, as they are sung by every Jewish congregation on Shabbat morning when the Torah is removed from the ark for the weekly reading. There's a little note there. I have to go to the index again and see what it has to say. And here's a contemporary scholar who offers the reason for the inverted nuns. This guy, Emmanuel Tov, in his book, Textual Criticism of the Hebrew Bible, 4th edition, Minneapolis, Minnesota, Fortress Press, 2022. And he wrote this. The so-called inverted nuim, the nun letters, found in the manuscripts and printed editions before Numbers 35 through 36 are misunderstood scribal signs indicating the removal of a signet that is inappropriate in the context according to a scribe. And these signs derive from the Greek letter sigma, which looks like a C, and its reversed shape anti-sigma, which is like a backward C, known from the Alexandrian scribal tradition and the Qumran scrolls as parenthesis signs. The inverted nuim represented the closest forms to the unknown sigma and antisigma. And in Numbers 10:35 through 36, the inverted nunim indicate that these verses, the Song of the Ark, did not appear in their correct place, as pointed out by a tradition in Avat R, not A34. The original scribal signs were meant as a warning observation for readers and for future scribes, and were not intended to be transferred. Okay. Well, that's pretty much the end of Numbers 10. Lord willing, I'll get to chapter 11 next time. But until then, may God bless you. The grace and mercy won by Jesus, the love of God, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with you all.